A California real estate licensee operates as the central facilitator in high-stakes financial transactions. In this role, they navigate complex negotiations, handle sensitive financial data, and manage the transfer of highly valuable physical assets. When an agent enters into an agency relationship with a buyer or seller, they assume a primary legal obligation. This is a fiduciary duty of absolute loyalty and strict confidentiality, along with rigorous advocacy owed exclusively to that represented party. But every transaction involves an opposing side. This unrepresented person, whether they are a buyer looking at a listing or a seller interacting with a buyer's agent, is classified as a third party, or a customer. This creates a direct legal paradox for the agent. They must aggressively advocate for the financial interests of their represented side while remaining legally bound to act fairly toward the unrepresented side. To map these relationships cleanly, we use a triparty diagram. The licensee sits at the top, managing the interaction between the two opposing principals. The connection on the left belongs to the client, receiving total representation and absolute confidentiality. The connection on the right belongs to the customer. They do not receive advisory services, but are owed specific legal obligations. The primary point of friction occurs here, where a client's aggressive demands might conflict with the customer's legal rights. Agency law establishes a definitive boundary rule to resolve this friction. An agent's fiduciary loyalty to their client never permits them to commit fraud or act dishonestly toward the customer. Running a successful, compliant real estate practice requires strictly compartmentalizing these two distinct sets of duties. You have to advocate for one side and protect the other without ever letting the obligations cross. We enforce that strict compartmentalization using a method called the two lanes operational model. The transaction is divided into two lanes. The client lane requires fiduciary duty, total loyalty, strict confidentiality, and prioritizing their best interests. The customer lane is governed by professional duties, reasonable skill, care, good faith, honest dealing, and the mandate to reveal hidden property issues. A material fact is defined as any piece of information that objectively affects the financial value or physical desirability of a property to a buyer. Fiduciary duty dictates who a licensee actively advocates for. Professional duty dictates how they must honestly interact with everyone else. Abstract definitions break down under pressure. To see how these lanes operate, we test them against a high-risk application involving a hidden property defect. Consider this scenario. A severe storm lashes against the property, with water actively pooling and leaking through the shingles. The roof currently appears dry and intact to the naked eye, but the seller knows definitively that it leaked during the rain. A prospective buyer arrives to tour the home. They do not have their own agent. They are strictly an unrepresented customer in this interaction. The conflict emerges when the seller explicitly instructs their agent to hide the history of the leak, hoping to secure a higher sale price. This flowchart tracks choices for the seller's request. Path A involves obeying the client and withholding leak information. This is a catastrophic error. Fiduciary loyalty cannot shield fraud. Path B requires disclosing the leak history to the buyer, which is the legally correct action. Material defects are strictly exempt from fiduciary concealment. The professional duty to disclose physical truth to a customer supersedes the duty to keep client secrets. Choosing the disclosure path ensures legal compliance, but it immediately creates a new operational challenge. The agent must inform the buyer without accidentally providing them with representation. To execute the customer lane requirement perfectly, the licensee simply provides the factual, documented proof of the roof leak directly to the buyer. They must draw a strict line between a material fact, the physical leak, which must be shared, and a strategic secret, like the seller's absolute bottom dollar, which must remain heavily guarded. The primary behavioral risk occurs during the disclosure itself. Agents often feel tempted to help the unrepresented buyer interpret the bad news. The limitation is absolute. The licensee must not offer the buyer advice on how much to lower their purchase offer based on the damaged roof. Offering negotiation advice is an act of advocacy. Crossing this boundary violates the fiduciary loyalty owed to the seller. In the ideal outcome, the seller's confidential negotiation tactics remain completely protected, while the buyer receives the unvarnished structural truth about the asset. The ultimate test of a licensee is providing total factual transparency to the customer on the right side of the transaction, while reserving all strategic advocacy exclusively for the client on the left. Moving past individual case studies, the mechanics of agency law resolve into foundational operating principles. A licensee must never provide client-level advisory services to a non-client, and conversely, they must never sacrifice honesty to secure an advantage for their client. We synthesize these rules into a concrete three-pillar memory framework to ensure absolute compliance and proper exam preparation. Pillar 1. Represent your client. This requires executing uncompromising fiduciary loyalty, confidentiality, and active advocacy. Pillar 2. Respect the customer. This means operating with reasonable care, absolute fairness, and good faith toward unrepresented parties at all times. Pillar 3. Disclose known material facts. This requires absolute transparency regarding any known physical issues that impact the property's value, regardless of client pressure to hide them. True professional competency requires navigating both lanes simultaneously. You protect the asset details for the customer and the strategy for the client, ensuring that aggressive advocacy never devolves into deception.